Hey guys, I'm here in DC, back in my hotel room finally after a very long day of meetings and media. And one of those media stops was NewsNation. I was actually on with Marc short and we discussed, or some would even say debated a bit, about President Trump and his treatment of Russia and Ukraine and his actual effort that has been put in to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, something very different from his predecessor who funded that war for 3 years with no end in sight and without actually even being able to put into words what a victory would look like. I had to bring up the very scary fact that Russia is a nuclear power, and if Russia is pushed to the brink of getting into some kind of a nuclear conflict, who's going to end up in that conflict? We are, the United States of America. And I know there are lots of reasons that the U.S. does not want to continue funding this never-ending war, but that is definitely one of them. The fact is there are definitely ways to end wars and try to avoid wars. There are ways to end conflicts. There are ways to go back and look at what's happened before. We stood by our allies in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we did not get into an all-out war. We actually tried to avoid it at all costs. We thought outside of the box to get that done. That's the opposite of what Joe Biden did. That's the reason we are in this mess. To begin with, there's a lot to talk about, so much more than I could even say in that short segment on NewsNation, but take a look still and let me know what you think.
I'm Blake Berman. President Trump firing off an overnight post saying China's Xi Jinping is hard to make a deal with. He then revealed a phone call as well with Vladimir Putin this morning. And Putin made it clear that the attacks on Ukraine aren't going to stop anytime soon. Joe Khalil in a moment on how the leader of the Republican Party is now handling this Musk moment. But we begin with our Robert Sherman live at the White House on the foreign foes that the president continues to deal with this evening. Robert?
Hey there, Blake. And the president speaking by phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin today. In terms of how it went, well, here's a big takeaway. The president saying that it was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. That attack the president referring to is the drone operation carried out by the Ukrainians, hitting Russian aircraft thousands of miles away from Ukrainian soil. The president remains hopeful a peace deal can be struck. The Russians are vowing to retaliate. The president's own special envoy, Keith Kellogg, fearing that the risk of escalation is rising.
We learned this morning the president's schedule was basically kind of wide open. And I was wondering, what's going on? This has been a couple days now. And Elizabeth, now we know he was talking to Vladimir Putin for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. President Trump says Putin made it very clear. Russia is not going to stop bombing Ukraine anytime soon. He said it was a phone call about attacks on both sides. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. Where does Trump go from here now? Because he talked about solving this thing on day one.
He did. Look, I think when it comes to Donald Trump, he has to answer for a 3-year mess. The fact is that Donald Trump was there when Putin initially invaded. I don't think what happened would have happened. I think in April of 2022, there would have been a chance for America, Donald Trump, to not get in the way of the agreement that was supposed to be made. The war would not have continued on, and now we're in this mess. The fact is Donald Trump isn't called an isolationist. He's not. He's talking to Putin. He's talking to everyone involved. He has an envoy on the scene. The fact is he wants to do whatever it takes for peace, but with that comes serious challenges.
Do you think that Trump thought he would have these, as Elizabeth said, serious challenges right now with Putin? Or do you think he thought he would have had this solved and sort of what's the next move here?
I think he knew that the challenge was. I think he probably assumed he would solve it faster. But, you know, I long for the days that Republicans actually had a position to say that when a former KGB dictator invades a country, slaughters women and children, steals children, brings them back across country lines, that your position would be to say, let's allow Ukraine to defend itself. That's the fastest way to peace.
So that's the position of your old boss, Mike Pence. President Trump's, of course,
in the first Trump administration, Blake. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest.
Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants Ukraine. The time has come for President Trump and the U.S. Senate to enact harsh sanctions on Russia and increase military support for Ukraine.
Let's keep in mind, it was the policy of the first administration. It was the one that actually prevented Nord Stream 2. It was the Trump administration that actually took out 100 Russian mercenaries in Syria when they crossed the red line. The president of the first administration was very tough on Russia. And so I welcome the chance to actually return to those same policies that I think contained Russia.
Do you think he needs to return to what Mike Pence is saying there?
I don't. I think the fact is Joe Biden, for 3 years, funded this war, and look what happened. There is no way that continuing to fund this war is proven to actually end anything. The fact is people don't want to talk about it. Look at the effort going on to keep Iran from a nuclear weapon. Russia has a nuclear arsenal bigger than really anyone out there except for us. So if we do end up in World War III, as Donald Trump calls it, who has to stop it? The United States of America.
All right.
The Biden administration tied the hands of Ukraine with the weapons that were provided. They never allowed them the freedom to actually defend themselves. Let's go back to returning to that policy like it was in the first Trump administration.
So if that's must